It's funny to think about, isn't it? How something as simple as a piece of paper, a book, could literally change the world. It sounds almost too basic, right? But the invention of printing, man, that was like a single drop of ink that started this massive ripple effect. A tidal wave, really, that just completely remade everything, religion, politics, even how we think. So let's get right into it.
Okay, so to really get a handle on just how big a deal this was, we gotta go back. I mean, way back. In our world, information is just everywhere. It's on our phones, our screens, it's constant. But just for a second, try to picture a world without any of that. A world before mass-produced books. Kinda quiet, right? So what even was knowledge back then? And maybe more importantly, who is in charge of it?
Well, that was the world of the scribe. Before printing, knowledge wasn't for everyone. It was a luxury item, like a designer handbag today, not something you'd find at the library. Every single book was a piece of art, copied out by hand, letter by painstaking letter. We're talking about writing on expensive animal skin, or these super fragile palm leaves. It could take months, sometimes even years, to make just one copy. So yeah, books were precious, incredibly rare, and pretty much only for the super rich.
But then, that first drop fell. The ripple began. And a lot of people think this story starts in Europe. But nope, we've got to go way further back and way further east. The real beginning is in East Asia.
Believe it or not, as far back as the 6th century, China was already using woodblock printing. Pretty cool, huh? They were cranking out textbooks for their civil service exams. Then, Buddhist missionaries took this tech over to Japan, and that's where we get the world's oldest dated printed book, the Diamond Sutra. And get this, in Korea, they created this absolutely massive collection, the Tripitaka Koreana, on more than 80,000 woodblocks. Just imagine that. The whole idea of making many copies of one thing, it was born right there.
So this amazing idea starts to travel west, but man, it took its sweet time. We're talking about 1295 when Marco Polo finally brings the concept of woodblock printing back to Europe. And, it was okay for small stuff like playing cards or little religious pictures, but for a whole book, no way. It was just too slow, too much work. So Europe had this growing thirst for knowledge, for books, but it was stuck. It had hit a wall.
And right there, at that wall, is where the real game changer happens. We're talking about the Gutenberg explosion. Seriously, this wasn't just some new gadget. This was a full-on detonation. It all goes down in Germany, where a goldsmith, Johann Gutenberg, is about to unleash a system that would send shockwaves around the entire planet.
Now here's the thing about Gutenberg. His real genius wasn't inventing something totally new out of thin air. Nah, it was his knack for combining things that already existed into one super efficient system. See, he took his skills with metal to create these tough, reusable letters. Then he looked at a wine press and thought, hey, I can adapt that. And finally, he figured out the perfect mechanism to press the paper down just right, getting a perfect, clean copy every single time. It wasn't just a press, it was a whole system built for mass production.
And the result? It was absolutely staggering. Let me put it this way. In the late 1400s, right before this, there were maybe 20 million hand-copied books in all of Europe. 100 years later, after Gutenberg's press, that number wasn't 30 million, it wasn't 40 million, it was 200 million. That's a tenfold explosion. This wasn't a change, it was an information flood. So think about it. What happens when books suddenly become cheap and easy to get? Well, your whole society changes. It goes from what we'd call a hearing public, where stories and news are passed along by word of mouth, to a reading public. But the printers were smart about it. They knew not everyone could read. So to get everyone in on it, they printed things like ballads and folk tales with lots of pictures. And these would be read out loud or sung in pubs and town squares. All of a sudden, that line between hearing a story and reading a story, it starts to get real blurry.
And this flood of information, it immediately slams right into the most powerful institution in Europe, the church. In 1517, you've got this monk, Martin Luther, who writes up his 95 Theses, basically a list of complaints about the church. And thanks to the printing press, his ideas went viral, 16th century style. We're talking copies spreading all across Europe in a matter of weeks. And just like that, you've got the spark that ignites the whole Protestant Reformation.
And you can bet the establishment didn't just sit back and watch. Of course they fought back. They were terrified of losing control. All these new, uncontrolled ideas flying around, to them, that was a direct threat. So the Roman Catholic Church comes up with something called the Index of Prohibited Books. It was basically a giant do not read list. And with that, the age of censorship was officially underway.
But you just can't stop a ripple like that.
It was already growing into these huge waves, and the next thing they were going to crash into? Politics, government. These waves were about to help build the very foundations of the world we live in today.
The printing press basically became the engine of the Enlightenment. You had all these brilliant thinkers, Voltaire, Rousseau, and they were using pamphlets and books to get these radical new ideas out there. Ideas about logic, about the rights of the individual, and about questioning the absolute power of kings. As one writer put it, print was a new kind of weapon, one that made tyrants tremble. And if you want a perfect example of this, just look at the French Revolution. Print basically poured fuel on that fire in 3 ways. First, it spread all those Enlightenment ideas we just talked about, which made people start to question the whole system. Second, it created this space where people could actually debate and discuss how things should be. And third, and this is a big one, you had a flood of cartoons and funny but harsh writings that just openly made fun of the king and queen. All of this made revolution seem not just possible, but like a real, actual idea.
Now, this ripple didn't just stop at the edges of Europe. As it traveled and reached India, it started to change and grow in really powerful new ways. The technology wasn't just copied, it was adapted. It became this incredible tool for public debate, for pushing social reforms, and for forging a whole new sense of national identity. So the first press actually landed in Goa way back in the 16th century with Portuguese missionaries. But it didn't really take off until the late 1700s when the first newspapers started popping up. And by the 1820s, you have these incredible Indian reformers like Ram Mohan Roy, who are using print to start huge public conversations on a scale that was just impossible before.
What print did was create this brand new battleground, a battleground for ideas. So when Ram Mohan Roy would publish articles arguing against certain social practices, the traditional Hindu orthodoxy would fire right back by starting their own newspaper to argue against him. All of a sudden, these huge, important debates about religion and society weren't happening behind closed doors anymore. They were out in the open for anyone and everyone to read and talk about.
And this was so empowering. It gave a voice to people who had never had one before. You have these amazing stories of women like Rasa Sundari Devi, who literally taught herself to read and write in secret in her kitchen, and then went on to publish her own autobiography. Now, of course, this made a lot of traditional folks nervous. You can even see that anxiety in the cartoons from that time. But it was too late. These new voices were out there, and they weren't going to be silenced.
But the story here in colonial India isn't that simple. It's kind of like an unfinished chapter, really. It's all about this constant push and pull, the power of print to bring people together versus the power of the government to shut it all down.
So as you'd expect, nationalist newspapers started getting louder and more critical of British rule. And how did the colonial government respond? With a crackdown. Big time. They passed something called the Vernacular Press Act in 1878, which basically gave them the power to do whatever they wanted, silence anyone who disagreed with them, confiscate the printing presses, and just shut down any newspaper they didn't like.
But trying to suppress ideas like that, it usually just makes people fight harder for them. The censorship actually made the fight for a free press a central part of the fight for independence itself. Mahatma Gandhi put it perfectly in 1922. He said the fight for Swaraj, for self-rule, was really a fight for the freedom of the press, above everything else, a freedom that wouldn't have even been a concept without print.
So when you step back and look at the whole story, it's just incredible, isn't it? It all started with a simple wood block in China and a wine press in Germany. And from that came a force that literally redrew the map of religion, sparked revolutions, and for the first time gave a real voice to the powerless. Honestly, every time you read a book, or even just a street sign, you're living in a world that was built by the printing press.
And that, of course, brings us right back to today. The story of the print revolution is really about how a new technology can completely change who gets to have a voice. Which leaves us with a pretty huge question for our own time, right? In our age of social media, AI, and algorithms, what's the next ripple going to be? Who is it going to empower, and what old systems is it going to challenge? The story, it seems, is far from over.